Hi everyone, welcome to After Dark Analysis. Today we are going to be looking at how the transgendered are treated in horror films, specifically by, spoiler warning, looking at the Sleepaway Camp franchise. The 1983 film Sleepaway Camp opens with a man out boating with his two children. Another group out boating allows a girl to steer the boat. She claims she's experienced. It turns out she's not as experienced as people thought she was. She ends up hitting the boat with the two children. You see a life vest float up. You know the family is injured. Cut to many, many years later, we see a young girl walk down the stairs, so we assumed at the little boy and the little girl we saw on the boat that the girl survived and is now living with her aunt. Her aunt, we quickly establish, is batshit insane, I believe is the clinical term for it. She's also a doctor who did the physical for both her son Richard and the girl we established who is named Angela. They are going to summer camp, which the aunt did the physicals and told them, can't tell anybody because the camp definitely wouldn't approve. It's a conflict of interest. We just write it off as that. And also, again, aunt's batshit insane. Can't emphasize that quite enough. Once the two tweens get to camp, we are greeted with the absolute delight that is Judy, who is Richard's old girlfriend. She has matured, so to speak, over the summer, meaning she has gone through puberty. To give you an idea of just the bucket of hormones all these kids are, they're just starting to hit puberty. I'm sure most of you can relate to what a fun and fantastic age that was. Judy and Angela are assigned to the same bunk, and Angela just keeps staring at Judy. And Angela is just completely emotionally shut down, completely mute, will not say anything to anyone. At one point, one of the counselors even sends Angela back to the kitchen because they're just afraid she's gonna starve herself because she hasn't eaten in days. The cook takes Angela back into the walk-in for quote-unquote ice cream. Apparently ice cream in this scenario means he's gonna try and have sex with an underage girl. Luckily, her cousin Richard walks in, makes a big enough noise, gets Angela out. The cook threatens to kill Richard if he tells anybody. On top of the attempted sexual assault, Angela is just mercilessly bullied the entire time. Luckily, Richard sees it and is absolutely more than willing to protect his cousin and step in. He's absolutely more than willing to do the right thing for her, which is great. Like, it sucks that she's being bullied, but it's great that he is willing to go against everybody and do the right thing for his cousin. In amongst all of the bullying by the other kids at camp, including even some of the counselors, which is really heinous, a boy ends up asking Angela out, which is he's equally as awkward as she is, but it seems like she's struggling a little bit more with her sexuality than he is. A fact that Judy is more than willing to jump on. She calls her gay. She even mocks her for supposedly not having her period. Ladies, do you honestly remember when that was a mockable thing? Like, that's not something that most women would be dogging on another woman for. Since she showers in the morning as opposed to night like the other girls, they all assume she's queer because she's gonna, check them out or something like that. It's moronic. But unfortunately, where pre-teen or teen girls are gonna go with insults even today. Eventually, Angela is willing to open up a little bit with the boy who's taken interest in her. They end up kissing. He does try and push things a little further. She freaks out a little bit and eventually approaches him later and says, well, meet me here. And makes it gives a clear signal that she's like, oh yeah, we'll have relations then. This is when we get the huge reveal in Sleepaway Camp. It turns out that Angela is not a girl. Angela is very much a boy. When the boating accident happened, the little boy survived. The little boy's name was Peter. When he went to live with the batshit insane aunt, because can't emphasize that enough, her justification was she already had a little boy, and she'd always wanted a little girl, so she had been dressing this poor little boy up as a little girl. Now, to be 100% clear, this is not a typical representation of the community. That example will come with the second film. This is simply the building block to that example. When you look at the first film, some things do fall into place with the transgender community. Bullying is by no means an exclusive thing. The amount that happens is very different. You see Angela get gone after way more than any of the other campers. There is a male camper by the name of Mozart who they do relentlessly go after, but not nearly as much as Angela. There is the sexual assault. While that cook is talking about other female campers in a very explicit manner, and it's very obvious that the other cooks are very disgusted by it and do not like that he's doing that, they didn't really step in and do much. When he does die, nobody's really that upset by it, and the only attempted sexual assault we see in this film is against Angela. And the amount of sexual assaults on the community is much, much higher. So while this is an extraordinarily atypical example, most in the community were not forced to live as another gender, causing this shift to happen. 99.999% of cases. There are some real world cases like this, and they did have very sad and tragic results. Majority were not forced to dress as women or dress as men. That was something they came to on their own, and that's how they feel they want to live. And that's fine. This is atypical, this is weird, and I get that, and I want to point that out there. But if we're talking just experience-wise and things that we're going through in life, statistically speaking, with the bullying, with the sexual assaults, unfortunately, this film does show some of that. Now we move on to 1988 with Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers. Angela Baker was put away in a psych hospital after the first film and has become somewhat of a campfire story. The tale of Camp Arawak, which was the camp from the first film, is now being told around the campfire by Phoebe, who is a camper at the new camp, who's, of course, just conveniently several miles down the road from where Arawak used to be. While there's some logical flaws from the first film, her claim is that Peter was 4 when his aunt started dressing him up as a girl. Angela walks up on Phoebe telling this. She is an adult now and very much a female. She is visibly shaken by hearing this story, and also hears that one of the boys sitting around the campfire is the son of one of the cops that arrested her. He also adds to the story by saying that Angela underwent a sex reassignment surgery, which Angela herself confirms later on. Angela quickly goes back to her old ways and kills Phoebe after calling her a slut. The reason Angela believes that Phoebe is a slut is because, well, she was out in the middle of the night with a bunch of boys, even though she was around a campfire with the head counselor, who actually ranks above Angela. She believes that's just not a place for a proper young lady to be. The backstory on how in the world Angela could have gotten a job as a counselor at a summer camp after what she did in the first film is that she underwent a lot of psychological treatment, had recommendations from doctors, psychiatrists, and even references a clergyman that recommended her. She says she had a lot of psychological treatment, she had a lot of different pharmaceutical treatment, and she did undergo a sex reassignment surgery. The belief, I'm guessing there, is that the damage was too far done psychologically from her aunt, dressing her constantly as a woman, that she just identified too heavily there, that it ended up being to the point where her identifying as Angela and not as Peter was going to be psychologically a lot less damaging to allow her to live in that body. While the coming to living in that different body was very different than most people, it's obviously the body at that point that she was more comfortable in. This is where we see the emphasis start to come off Angela being born a boy into more of her personality. She takes an incredibly puritanical stance, which, again, we've seen this 1,000,000,001 times in horror, especially with a killer. So it's kind of weird to see this gender swap happen with this puritanical lens with a female. She very much takes a camper named Molly, who comes off as a bit of a goody-goody, and she takes her under her wing and is very supportive and nurturing towards her. She takes almost this very maternal or big sister role. She even brags to Molly about being a virgin and says to Molly, it's totally fine that you're a virgin. Stay a virgin as long as you want to be. You know, you'll know when the time is right. Because when they're talking about another sexually active camper, she says, well, you know, she's so much more experienced than me. And she's like, well, she's got a bunch of STDs to go along with it too. And when she, you know, says, like, that's a kind of offensive comment to make about another camper, she's like, well, these day and age, you can't be too careful. Because, again, this is in 88. We were right in the big AIDS scare. There was even another version to this because the girl they were actually talking about has sex with a boy without a condom. As she's getting dressed, says, "You don't have AIDS or anything, do you?" And he goes, "No." And she's like, "Oh, it's just checking." Like, after she's done having sex with him. And, like, not a condom in sight. It's like, yeah, that doesn't work. You kind of need to do that beforehand. Because while the campers we're dealing with in this movie are older than the ones at Camp Arawak, again, still bucket of hormones. Like, that's just what we're going to be dealing with throughout this entire franchise, because that's, again, what we're typically dealing with in horror, is just buckets of hormones. There's even a group of 2 boys that go around and like to take pictures through the windows of course, the female bunks, trying to catch them topless. When she finds these, she gets incredibly upset, obviously, because it's a huge violation. You shouldn't have to worry about having your picture taken when you're undressing and in your private moment. When she's showing them to another counselor, she's like, "I've never found pornography funny," when he tried to minimize the situation. And when he made it clear he wouldn't handle it, Angela handled it in her own way, which, I mean, as we saw in the first film, is killing everybody. The funny thing is, though, in all of this puritanical stance she takes, she kind of does admit her own hypocrisy, because she sits there and she's reading all these labels when she's pretty much killed everybody and has a few people hostage. She's like, they put all this junk in food and da-da-da-da, you've always got to read labels. She's like, "I wish they could make French fries healthy. I love French fries." So she's giving this whole big spiel about eating healthy and then just talking about how much she loves French fries. So there is kind of that nod to, I get I'm being a hypocrite right here. I get this puritanical idea that would reject somebody like me is hypocritical. And in its own way, it's showing that somebody like her that a lot of people may reject and may take issue with even existing can still have this strong belief system. Even though, yes, taking it to an extreme where you're just murder-deathing people is a bad idea. It's a bad idea when anybody does it. Killing people isn't really the best idea, normally. Had she dialed it back a few notches and just lived by this very rigorous, try and be good to people, try and be nice to people. Because that really is her beef with most of these campers, is they're just being flat out nasty to each other and bullying each other like she experienced in the first film. That's most of why she ends up killing them, is they're just doing these dirty, nasty things and stealing each other's boyfriends or whatever. She's like, yeah, they've just been nice to each other. Probably most of this wouldn't have happened. Had she toned it back a few notches, well, A, it wouldn't have been a horror film, but B, she probably could have been a very decent person and could have shown people, it's like, well, you can't hate good people being in the world. The world needs more of that. This brings us on to Sleepaway Camp 3. There are plenty more sequels in this franchise. I'm just dealing with these 3 because they deal with Angela the most. By the time 3 comes around, it really is almost no emphasis on the fact that she's trans. It really is just the fact that she's a camp killer. It's just that she is the Angel of Death, which is her nickname at this point. This one revolves around a camp called New Horizons, which is going to mix super rich kids with super poor kids, and trying to teach them how to share and bond and connect. It's shot in the exact same camp as the second film, because these films were also shot back to back. Instead of a counselor this time, though, Angela is trying to pass herself off as 17-year-old Maria. Since she's coming as a quote-unquote inner-city kid, though, she's trying to blame heavy drug use on the fact that she looks like an adult, because she is an adult. The only real reference to her kind of having any kind of surgery or operation is the fact that she still wears a very old school corset style brassiere. And one of the other campers makes a joke of, how do you get that off with a can opener? Well, yeah, that hints to her puritanical being. The fact that this is shot in 89, the fact that surgery had not come along nearly as well as it has now. And I mean, still, there's plenty of botched surgeries out there, unfortunately. It could also be to hide some nastiness with her scarring. So that's really the only aversion we get to her ever having been a boy. Peter is long gone. It barely ever gets referenced. Because while they do tell the campfire tale about Angela Baker, the emphasis is more on the fact that she freaking killed 2 camps full of people. The cop from first one, and whose son was in the second one, who she ended up killing, is in the third one. Well, it was shot back to back with the second one. It takes place 2 years after. It's a little confusing, I know. And this good person side of Angela comes out more and more because the people running this camp are just terrible people. It's a complete money grab. They're just like, oh yeah, we're gonna camp. And by camping, they mean we're gonna pitch a few tents out in the woods. It's a married couple running it. She catches the husband screwing around, which, at least in this one, the camper that's messing around with the husband insists on a condom. A little bit more advanced than the second one. And she kills both of them because, well, you know, infidelity. The wife is completely lazy and was basically having campers run ragged for her, so she kills her because she was being nasty. The one that she does the worst, though, was a camper who just kept spouting racist things. Like, she ends up dropping the N-bomb. And Angela just goes ballistic. So she's like, I hate racism, and I hate people being nasty, and I hate all these things. So this one just did hammer home the point they were kind of starting to get at it too, is Angela, while she goes about it completely the wrong way, is at her heart kind of trying to be a good person. Yeah, you know, she wants people to just be nice to each other. She wants people to be decent to each other. She wants to be a good person. She just goes way overboard when people aren't being good to each other. I mean, throughout the entire film, there's maybe 2 people you can argue actually were decent people. And that's pretty rare for a horror movie. Like, yeah, as I've argued in the past, like, most people in a horror film are there to die. You normally have a couple people you're rooting for. 3 is just, you're completely rooting for Angela to just kill a few of these people. There was no chill with this one. It's just like, okay, can you just take care of these people already? It was completely set up for that. It was obvious that was the way the script was written. And it was just less and less about where she started and more about who she was. I know that sounds weird to end an episode on the representation of the transgender community in horror on, but at the end of the day, isn't that kind of what it is about? Is more about the person you are than what your body is and what it's like. Because at the end of the day, a good person's a good person. I don't really care what is or isn't or was or wasn't between your legs. Is this the greatest depiction of the community in film ever? No. But horror at least seems to try a little harder than many other genres that deal with the topic, because honestly, aside from drama, the only other genre I see deal with this pretty often is comedy, and 9 times out of 10 comedy, it's just like, you picked up a dude from the bar, you're gay, and I'm just like, well, no, it's not really making him gay if he thought they were the opposite sex, and anyway, if somebody can explain that trope to me, I'd be really grateful. And while I know films like Unhinged have dealt with the gender-swapped killer, and I've talked about the gender-swapped killer, I didn't feel those were true representations of the transgender community in horror. Because a lot of the time, the dressing wasn't by choice, and it feels like while Angela didn't necessarily choose to become Angela from Peter, eventually at some point she did end up feeling more comfortable in that body. And while you don't necessarily have to have the surgery, it just seemed to make sense that it ended up going there, and it felt more like a representation. But if you feel like there's a better representation in the genre, I'd certainly love to hear it. Thank you for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please hit like, comment, subscribe. If you don't like what you're hearing, well, comment then. Let me know what you'd like to hear. Hit that dislike button. It exists. I just like some feedback, so, you know, try and work on things. Thank you.